In this section, we're going to talk about how Griffith's politics and the goals of his film are aided and communicated through very sophisticated editing and cinematography. We're going to focus on a few of the categories that we've talked about thus far, most importantly, continuity editing. And so continuity editing, as we've discussed, is when shots are edited together imperceptibly so that the action of a sequence appears to be continuous. And this is a standard form of editing. It creates a smooth flow between shots so that the story takes priority over the mechanics of storytelling. That is, our attention isn't called to all of the cuts and all of the varying shot lengths, but instead they feel quite natural to us, and we get positioned within the bodies and minds of the characters. It helps us identify with them, with their stories, with their plights, and with their ideas. Parallel editing is one of these forms of continuity editing. We also call it cross-cutting, and it's the technique of alternating between two or more scenes that happen simultaneously but in different locations. And as I pointed out before, this can also happen through flashbacks and flash forwards. So it can be times that you're switching between as well. But here we'll see it between places, things that are happening concurrently or simultaneously. But in different physical locations. And often they culminate in a single place where the relevant parties all confront each other. And this happens in chase sequences, and that's what we're going to see play out in the clip from Birth of a Nation. Griffith also uses a lot of match editing. And so a match edit is a cut in which an element of one shot is carried over into the next shot to smooth the transition between those two so that we don't lose our orientation in the screen space. And we'll notice this can happen in terms of the direction characters are moving. It can be a person or an object that's in one shot that's carried over into the next shot. And as we'll see in particular kinds of match editing, this can even mean a glance, the direction of a glance or a look, and how that helps us position ourselves within the space that's being constructed across splices and edits. One such continuity edit that we're going to be paying a lot of attention to is point of view. So if you'll remember, this is when the camera's perspective matches that of the characters. And often we see the character first and then what the character is looking at. And we get a sense of their relationship to each other, the character and the object looked at, but also we often get that reaction shot. So the response, emotional or otherwise, on the face of the character to what they've seen. And we call this a shot reverse shot as well. There are many kinds of match edits in the scene that we're going to watch, but one in particular we'll look for is the eyeline match. I'll point out a few other kinds of match shots that happen in this scene as well. But if you remember, the eyeline match is when a character looks in the direction of another character, even if that second character is not in the shot. If the actor looks to the right side of the screen right, it creates an imaginary line between the actor in the shot and the one off screen. And then if the other character looks left, it's implied he's looking at that first actor. So this is a kind of point of view shot. We'll notice that Griffith uses a lot of different types of shot in terms of cinematography in every given scene. So he often begins with long shots and then moves closer and further away from the character, often through a series of match edits. So we're going to be paying special attention to this. We've not seen this in the other films we've watched thus far, at least not with this amount of intervention within a scene. So remember, Griffith is someone who really believed that film could be something quite different from theater. We weren't going to see scenes as if they were stage sets and an edit opens and closes that scene like curtains, but instead we as spectators would be moved in and out, kind of surgically getting closer and further away from what we saw on the screen. I'm pointing out all of these editing techniques again here so that we can easily notice them, but also to call our attention once again to that these techniques are often referred to as invisible edits. Now, obviously, we can see them. They aren't literally invisible, but they're designed to direct our attention to the story that's unfolding rather than to the invasive, manipulating things that the director or editor is doing to the film itself. We're going to see lots of non-invisible edits when we look at modernist film in just a few units. In there, we'll see almost every cut calls our attention to it and what the director is doing to the physical material, to the physical surface of film. So what we'll get is a real disruption of the illusion and the realism that we get so emphatically in Griffith's films. Now, by making the storytelling process seamless and invisible, and by weaving a fictional story through a set of historical facts and visual references, Griffith is able to make it easy for viewers to consume his version of history. Griffith's cinematography, editing, and narrative choices have a profound effect, and this effect, as we've talked about in the past, is that of realism. And while there's no way to put aside the political aims and the effects of Griffith's film, I want us to analyze a scene that exemplifies Griffith's skill in storytelling. Despite his politics, he was a real master in editing, and he knew what cinema could do and that it was going to do something quite different from theater. And this would happen by embracing the power of the edit and across those edits, making different choices in terms of cinematography, of moving closer and further away from the scene, of giving us details and insight through those details. So we're going to look at a scene from this film. It's usually referred to as Little Sister's Fate. It's the one in which she goes out of the house to get water from the well despite the advice of her family, and she sneaks away and encounters Gus, a Union soldier who has fallen in love with her and wants to marry her, and a chase scene ensues from here. Fabe's book involves a detailed analysis of this scene, which is what we're going to be drawing upon in this reading. So I'm going to have you watch the scene once through, and then we'll come back in and talk about it together. So this was a very dramatic scene, and I hope you took notice of the various types of match edits, the changes in cinematography, as well as the dramatic cross-cutting that happens here. And so when we come upon the Cameron women, they are busying themselves sewing uniforms for the insurgent KKK, and we have Flora, the youngest of the Cameron daughters, decide to go off to get water from the well for her mother and sister. And this well is quite far from their home, we will see. And this is clearly against her brother's wishes, who don't want their women out in the world among the new soldiers who are in town. And so we watch her leave and exit to the right screen, and then she enters on the left side of the screen as she's just come across. So we have this idea of her moving across space, leaving on the right and entering on the left, and we see that again here. Very careful, and we see Gus do exactly the same thing. So Gus is now in pursuit of her. He is sneaking low along the fence. He seems dangerous already. And of course, Flora is hopping and skipping very carelessly throughout the woods. And now we see her no longer anywhere near a town or civilization, but in this deep forest. And Gus appears at, again, this fence that we've just seen her at and turns away. So we know that Gus has now left and Flora is in safety. Here we get a great match edit where we saw the bucket in a longer shot and then a close-up of the bucket, and now another kind of medium shot. Gus has returned. So now we thought Flora was safe, but Gus has come back. And we now see Flora looking off the left side of the screen, and she skips in that direction. We get the sense from the way we've been oriented in space that she has no idea that Gus is behind her. We get a series of eyeline matches and point of view shots here of Flora looking very cutely at this squirrel. The squirrel is shown in a close-up iris, as if Flora's vision is narrowed directly onto that squirrel and nothing else. And Gus here is crawling in this barren bramble of bushes. And now we see Flora in that same kind of iris, just like the squirrel, implying that we have three different kinds of eyeline matches happening here. Gus's, Flora's, and the squirrel's. And she is being looked at as if she is that cute and delicate and vulnerable thing, just like she is looking at the squirrel. We get the sense of her as being a kind of victim or vulnerable in this. And she's obviously not paying attention. Now we cut back to the house. So this is our first cross cut. We have Ben return home, and the mother tells Ben that she's gone out into the woods. He is, of course, furious, and we get a cross cut to what's happening right now, the approach of Gus to Flora. And so the rest of the way this scene will be structured is in these kinds of crosscuts. We will see Ben retrace those very same steps and pass those same landmarks that we just saw Gus and Flora. And now we have Gus and Flora in the same shot. We had a longer shot, and then we zoomed into the two of them as we get in this medium close, and now we have a series of shots of them individually with eyeline matches going from right to left, left to right, across the splice. While we're seeing both of them in close-up, it's this establishing shot, and then the match edits keep continuing each of them into the frame that keeps our position in here. Flora will take off through the woods, running, and we're going to see in a series of edits, Gus in quick pursuit, again, going across the very same landmarks. We'll see Flora, as she moves, becoming a smaller and smaller figure within the landscape. Ben is now at that landmark fence, and we know he's in hot pursuit. Flora, who we had seen in these close-ups, is now lost in this very huge forest. She's being kind of dwarfed by the landscape around her, seeming less and less powerful. And again, a crosscut to Ben in hot pursuit. Now we have Flora as a tiny figure in this huge, huge forest. And you get the sense that this was not shot in South Carolina, but in California. But we have Gus pursuing her, and she seems very lost and helpless within this space. Ben then retraces her steps. He sees her abandoned bucket. He follows her footsteps on the ground, will eventually pick up some clues that gets on their trail. And now we see these great close-ups of Flora's frightened, terrified face, right? Griffith gets in very close. And we also see the wild eyes of Gus, which of course is set off by the blackface makeup that Griffith has him in. Ben comes to all of these familiar landmarks. So we are cross-cutting between Ben and Gus and Flora, who are now in the same frame. We see Gus's jacket. Ben knows exactly what's happening and calls out for her and, again, pursues her. Flora is becoming smaller and smaller still. Ben chases across these huge landscapes. It seems really unlikely that Ben will find Flora in this huge expanse. And now we've seen Flora come to the edge of a large cliff. This is a very dramatic scene, and the cross-cutting really highlights this, as well as these close-ups we get of their faces. And we're going to see another series of closer shots of their faces as Gus enters into the frame and gets closer and closer, and Flora as we get a real focus on her face, and as well as Ben's terrified gaze. Flora, we get a sense through her acting, as well as this intertitle, that she is going to jump if Gus does not back off, which of course he does not. We see her conviction and her terror, again, in this, what is a very close shot for the time. It's not an extreme close-up by any means, but we get the intensity of Flora's emotions and face. We see her screaming into the wind, hoping that anyone can hear her. And as Gus gets closer, she, of course, has already made her choice and jumps to her fateful death. And we have that great switch of the dummy that fell over the edge to the body of the actress as she tumbles down and out of the frame. Ben still hasn't caught up to her, but he does in the next few moments. And so we have two kind of sets of cross-cutting here, of course. We have the cross-cutting between Flora and Gus as he pursues her. And then once Gus and Flora are kind of coming in and out of the frames together as he gets closer and loses track of her, we also have Ben then as a third term, cross-cutting between Flora and Gus, and Ben in pursuit. And now we have the eyeline match of Ben looking down into the ravine at his dying sister. And he quickly scrambles down to witness her in her last moments of life, and of course vow revenge upon Union soldiers and African Americans in general within Griffith's logic of this film. So this is a very fast-paced scene, as I imagine my nearly breathless attempt at narrating the shots and the cuts it testifies to. And so it's, again, while I think you should really go back to Fabe's book to see how she breaks that down. This is, again, while the shots are pretty long in length for what we might be used to as modern audiences, these cuts come in very quick succession, and the changes that Griffith makes in terms of cinematography, in terms of the distance, the way in which we get close-ups, cut with establishing shots where we show the relationships of two characters within the frame, the way in which long shots give us an emotional sense of how small and vulnerable certain figures are. Even that device of irising, of putting kind of a circle around the central figure in a frame, which he does with the squirrel and with Flora from Gus's perspective, gives us a sense of them becoming objects of a look, of the squirrel being the object of Flora's look, and Flora being the object of Gus's look, and their vulnerability in those moments. We get the super dramatic cross-cutting between Gus slowly chasing Flora until tracking her until they are in the same scene, and then Ben in a frantic rush pursuing both Flora and Gus, trying to intervene before anything terrible or dramatic happens. And of course, part of the disappointment here that we don't maybe expect in film is that Ben doesn't get there in time. Flora throws herself from the cliff before she knows that Ben is there to help rescue her. And of course, women in this film are always in need of rescuing, and always from the very same danger that that Griffith sets up, which is of racial intermixing. So Griffith is able to really up the emotional ante in this film. We, through being put in Flora's point of view over and over again, we can identify, or we're led to identify with her fear of being pursued, even if it seems a bit hyperbolic in this scene. Gus doesn't seem to be an immediate physical threat, but even his intentions within Griffith's world of wanting to marry her is threat enough. So he's able, throughout the film, not just in this one scene, to get us to identify with the figures in the film, particularly the Camerons, particularly Southern characters, and to always have the Northern soldier characters, and particularly African American characters, as being threatening forces that are pursuing in this film. And this is done, as we pointed out, through editing, through the tense actions of cross-cutting, and through showing through those close-ups a real dramatic emotion. And remember, this is the kind of dramatic emotion you couldn't get in theater. In theater, you're always a set distance away from the character, but Griffith brings us closer and closer to the subject in the scene, so we can see Gus's wild eyes, or we can see Flora's quivering mouth, or Ben's panic as it moves across his face. These are the innovations that Griffith developed in this film to learn how to capture audiences. And as I've said, we're going to see these techniques, if not these politics, taken up across filmmaking in Griffith's wake, whether it's to turn these ideas on their ear or inside out for completely different political and even aesthetic ends, or to really establish how it is that we will identify with characters. We'll see this as we move forward in the class. Point of view and identification with the main character becomes a trope and a real tool in filmmaking that sets it apart from the kinds of experiences we can have in relationship to the stage.